channel. Okay, meaning if you've got an antenna, you don't have to have a streaming service, no cable, no satellite, nothing. If you got an antenna with range, Ion is one of the channels you get for free on antenna, and they show a lot of these games the Indiana Fever will be playing, including these preseason games. So, and in fact, let's just check it out so everybody's on the same page.
Caitlin Clark was set to make her return to the court in an Indiana Fever uniform for their preseason matchup against the New York Liberty, a moment a large portion of the fan base had been anticipating since the offseason began. The game was scheduled to air on the ION network, which is accessible through Roku, Amazon Prime, YouTube TV, Fubo, and a range of other streaming platforms. ION is also a free over-the-air channel, meaning anyone with a working antenna could watch without a paid subscription. Relevant information given how many Fever games are slated to appear on the network throughout the season. However, the day before the contest, the injury report dropped and pulled attention away from the excitement.
I don't want anybody to be surprised. Indiana Fever at New York Liberty today, 2 o'clock, during the NFL draft. For me, the draft is one of my favorite sporting events of the year, so it is what it is. I'll have to record the draft so I can watch Caitlin Clark play. Now, this came out yesterday afternoon late.
Aliyah Boston was listed as out with a lower leg issue. Ty Harris was ruled out with a knee injury. Lexi Hall was sidelined by hamstring tightness. Demarion Dantes was listed as not with the team for non-injury reasons.
Status report for tomorrow's game at New York. Aliyah Boston out, lower leg. Demarius Dantes, NWT, not sure what that is. Ty Harris out, knee. Lexi Hall out, hamstring. The one that I keep coming back to is this. Aliyah Boston out, lower leg. Now look, we all have been wondering what the hell is going on with
the entry that generated the most conversation was Boston's absence. Her situation had been building for weeks without any clear resolution or specific diagnosis. She was ruled out of the unrivaled playoffs back in March with what was described only as a lower extremity injury. That same vague language followed her to the USA Basketball World Cup qualifying tournament in Puerto Rico, where she was withdrawn from the squad under the same descriptor.
Aliyah Boston and her injury, because ever since on March 1, this came out, and everybody found out the Phantom in Unrivaled ruled Boston out for the rest of the playoffs, and then Aliyah Boston was ruled out of the USA Basketball World Cup qualifying after Unrivaled injury. And by the way, nothing has been specific about the injury.
No official specification of what was actually wrong, whether a tendon, a bone, soft tissue, had been offered publicly at any point. Despite that, Boston was reported just 6 days prior to the game as feeling good and ready to work, language that only deepened the confusion when she appeared on the unavailable list days later. Fan response was sharp and largely rooted in frustration built up from last season. The handling of Caitlin Clark's injury in 2024, where the organization repeatedly used day-to-day designations across a stretch of months, left a lasting wound with supporters who felt they were being strung along rather than given honest information.
Look at the way this reads. After suffering a lower extremity injury. Same thing right here, ESPN. A right lower extremity injury. What does that mean exactly? The mystery around her injury is interesting. Now,
in professional sports, day-to-day typically signals a near-term return. Using that language across an extended period without clarity felt to many like a deliberate management of expectations rather than genuine communication. That experience colored how the Boston situation was being received, with a significant portion of the fan base arriving at the new injury report already skeptical. The unrivaled league also drew renewed criticism in this context.
Right here, this is Chloe Peterson and Brian Hodgkin. I don't know. I've never even heard of that guy. Aliyah Boston pulled out of last month's FIBA World Cup qualifying tournament in Puerto Rico after suffering a right lower extremity injury. What is the injury? I mean, this is turning into who killed JFK. We got a conspiracy. She said,
with Boston now sidelined at the start of the WNBA preseason due to something that occurred during the offseason competition, the argument that the league represented a conflict of interest for WNBA player availability gained traction in fan discussions. The absence of both Boston and Dantes also raised practical questions about how Indiana would handle the front court. With neither post player available, the team would be leaning heavily on guards and versatile wings to cover ground in the paint, an arrangement that generated some dark humor among supporters, pointing out the organizational depth issues at the center and power forward positions. The broader sentiment circling the conversation was one of deja vu.
Said Sunday she was feeling good to go and ready to work. So we're talking 6 days ago that she was ready to go to work? What does that mean? Does that mean ready to go to rehab? What are we doing? So there was a lot of response from fans. If I saw Caitlin Clark's name on here, I think I would have vomited. You and everybody else. Guys, I'm going to tell you.
The specific injury language, the vague updates, the fan confusion, the social media reaction, it all carried the texture of situations that had played out before with this franchise. What the fan base seemed to want most was not optimism or spin, but direct and specific information about what was actually happening with their players. Raven Johnson's performance in the Fever's first preseason game was genuinely impressive, particularly on the defensive end. The conversation around her tends to get sidetracked into debates about whether she should be starting ahead of Caitlin Clark or whether Clark should shift to the 2, neither of which is a serious discussion.
I'll tell you right now, you've seen some negative response towards the Indiana Fever because of how they handled that injury situation last year with fans. No doubt about it. I think it's why ticket sales have been slower. It just did not land well. Evelyn DR, nope. I mean, what? Yeah, a lot of people.
Johnson at 5'9" with a 6'4" wingspan is physically comparable to a 6-footer with standard proportions, which puts her in roughly the same range as Sophie Cunningham. Playing her at the 3 is a realistic option, but that is not the most interesting thing about what she showed in this game. The defensive performance was what stood out.
And that's what I was as impressed with as anything with. And by the way, I was more impressed with how she played in the first half and the second half. In the first half, or in the second half, she basically, it was the scrubs versus, lack of a better word, the third stringers versus third stringers. She played a few minutes when they pulled Justine Passat out of the game. That being said, it is one of those things where, when it comes down to it, I think there are times when you need absolute control of the game. My only problem with
not the steals and blocks, those are surface-level statistics that get attached to her name because of her physical tools, but the reads. There was one play in particular where she recognized that her assignment was not going to receive the ball, picked up on the passer's eyes, stepped into the passing lane, and made a play that had nothing to do with athleticism and everything to do with awareness. That is a different level of processing for a young player in her first WNBA action. Her 2 blocks in the game were recovery plays, the kind of thing that happens when someone has long arms and gets to a spot in time.
My only problem with Raven Johnson as a individual point guard is that not that she doesn't run the floor, because she does. She doesn't really put her head up in transition. She doesn't put her head up at all really in transition. And we saw a couple of times where it's okay. Well, to be fair, I'm not even going to say she does it less than anyone else. She's just not Caitlin Clark.
The reads were the real story. The end of quarter sequence around the third quarter break, where a team ran an action to free up a corner 3, and Johnson simply stood still and tracked the whole thing, ending up in perfect position on the shooter before the ball arrived, was the clearest example of what separates her defensive instincts from most players at her stage. Off-ball defense in college is a different skill set than off-ball defense in the WNBA, where the actions are faster, the reads are more complex, and everyone on the floor can punish a mistake. She looked comfortable in that environment,
not Caitlin Clark. And what the Indiana Fever get from that transition point guard in Caitlin Clark is like a like is something that no other point guard does. That being said, like she is a connective piece. She's a good passer. She had a nice jump shot. She isn't really looking for a shot, which can be a bit of a problem, but also maybe not. And to an extent, doesn't really look for a shot too much. Doesn't slash a lot.
There are real limitations to address honestly. In transition, she is not raising her head to survey the floor the way Clark does. That specific ability, reading the court at full speed and making decisions before the defense sets, is genuinely rare, and the Fever benefit from it enormously when Clark is running the break. Johnson does not have that yet.
Doesn't really look for a shot too much. Doesn't slash a lot. Is like genuinely a passable offensive player because she's a connected passer. She's Marcus Smart. She is Marcus Smart. And maybe she will eventually improve the offensive game. But like, this is a perennial depoy candidate. Like, I was shocked at I knew about her on-ball defense, and I knew about some of the off-ball things. And by the way, stop saying she can guard power forwards in the league.
She is also not a scoring threat in any consistent sense, which can become a problem when defenses simply ignore her positioning. She is not looking to slash, not pulling up off the dribble, and is operating entirely as a connective passer. That is the Marcus Smart role, an elite defensive presence and functional offensive piece who makes the players around her better without demanding the ball. Smart eventually developed enough offensively to stay on the floor in important moments.
By the way, stop saying she can guard power forwards in the league. Dugalich is being converted into a shooting guard. Like, and there is not one power forward in the league that would not eat Raven Johnson alive. But what she can do is, if she occasionally gets switched onto a power forward, she might not get absolutely destroyed. But I really liked her defensive reads. It was the off-the-ball defense that I'm like, okay. Because like it's very different watching someone play at South Carolina and watching someone play in the W. Like, when you're playing on a team that's meant to win every game, it's very different.
Whether Johnson follows that arc remains to be seen. The realistic projection for her minutes this season sits below 10 per game, which means she is developing in the background rather than contributing in high-leverage situations. What the long-term picture could look like is more interesting. If Kelsey Mitchell is not retained next year, Johnson's path to a starting role becomes considerably clearer.
Playing on a team that's meant to win every game, it's very different. But like, she made one unbelievable, I don't even know if it counted as her steal, where she kind of basically played like a fullback in rugby. And she just almost played like a sweeper role. She saw her player wasn't going to get the ball and just decided, you know what, I can see the eyes of what this point guard's throwing the ball. I'm going to make a read. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, that was impressive. Her two blocks were what they were. Like, they're defensive recovery plays. Like, that happens. Like, we all know Raven's got long arms.
Even this season, she is competing for defensive specialist minutes against Lexi Hull, and the argument that Hull is simply better because she is taller does not hold up once wingspan is accounted for. They reach roughly the same height on contested plays. The difference is Hull needs to be a shooting threat to justify her spot in the rotation, and there are matchups where Johnson's defensive profile is simply more useful. The playoff scenarios where she becomes genuinely valuable are specific but real.
That happens. Like, we all know Raven's got long arms. Like, defense is not steals and blocks. There were a couple of reads that she made in the defensive end. The read that she made, I think, was the end of the third? Was it the end of the third quarter where they called a timeout? It was after Passat fell for 3, I think. Or was it Passat fell for 2? But either way, it was, they kind of ran some play to get like a over the top 3 for the opposite corner. Raven just stood there, seeing exactly what was going on, knew exactly.
Harris will be ahead of Johnson in the rotation all season. But this game demonstrated something that overrides the roster construction concern. Johnson is already a WNBA-level player. Watching comparable picks from the same draft class elsewhere in this game, players selected earlier who offered considerably less made that clear. The Fever may have found something that will matter considerably more in year 2 and 3 than it does this season.
Over the top 3 for the opposite corner. Raven just stood there, seeing exactly what was going on, knew exactly where it was so that she could go and guard the shooter on that play. Like, her defensive instincts and defensive awareness are incredible. And I think long term, I I am concerned for how little she's going to play this year because I think her minutes this year are going to start with a 0. Like, I think she plays sub 10 minutes a game this year. But I see the vision. I see the vision because I can see Raven Johnson becoming, like, if they can't keep Kelsey